scary story. We were sitting on the swing set in Mike's backyard. Me, Mike, Sam, and Josh. Mike was a master of scary stories. He had a way with his voice, a way with which to build tension, that even the most inveterate skeptics like Sam would fidget and glance around. That evening, Mike decided to tell us a local legend, usually whispered around campfires or at sleepovers, the legend of Long-Legged Larius. They say he lives in an old factory on the outskirts of town. Mike began in a low, hoarse voice, looking around at us with his dark eyes, in which mischievous lights danced. No one knows for sure who or what he is, but those who supposedly saw him and survived. Mike paused, enjoying our tense anticipation. They describe him the same way: tall, thin, almost a skeleton, covered in gray skin. But the creepiest thing is his legs. They are unnaturally long, thin, like a spider's, and they move just as quickly, silently along the walls, along the ceiling. George swallowed nervously. Semba tried to maintain a calm appearance, but I saw how his shoulders tensed. I felt goosebumps run down my spine. The old factory. We all knew that place. A huge rusty monster, abandoned many years ago, surrounded by a high steel fence with barbed wire. A place where our parents strictly forbade us to go. They say he hunts at night. Mike continued, lowering his voice to an ominous whisper, taking those who dare approach his lair, grabbing them with his long spider legs, and dragging them inside to the factory, and no one ever sees them again. He paused again, letting the words soak into our consciousness, growing there like cold shoots of fear. Then his gaze settled on me. The corners of his lips twitched. "What, Ethan? Are you scared?" he asked outwardly loudly, clearly playing to the audience of Sam and Josh. "You've already wet your pants. I can see you're shaking all over." I felt my cheeks flush. Mike liked to do this. Pick out one person and tease them, especially if he saw a sign of fear or weakness. That's what made him tough in the eyes of others. "That's not true," I muttered, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Just a scary story." "Oh, it's more than just a story." Mike leaned towards me, his eyes gleaming with challenge. "It's a legend, and every legend has some truth to it. Should we check?" Ethan, I'm too weak to go to the factory and see if our long-legged friend is crawling around there." Sam and George chuckled softly. I felt cornered. To refuse would be to admit I was a coward in front of everyone. To agree would be to face my greatest fear. "Enough talk, Mike," I said, trying to appear indifferent. "These are just stories for children." "Stories? Are you sure? Maybe we should dig deeper?" For the next few days, Mike was obsessed with Laria's long-legged self. He dragged me to the local library after school, forcing me to rummage through old newspaper files. We spent hours sitting in front of a dusty computer, poring over city archives and dubious forms devoted to urban legends. At first, it all seemed like a silly idea. The stories were vague and contradictory. Some wrote that Larry was the ghost of a worker who died at the factory. Others claimed he was an escaped patient from a mental hospital. The spider-legged version seemed the wildest, the most implausible, and I almost convinced myself that Mike was just messing around, trying to scare me and have fun at the same time. But then Mike stumbled upon it. An article from the Evening Mischievous from 1987. A tiny piece on page 3. The headline read, "3 teens missing." The article talked about 3 high school students, 2 boys and a girl, who left home on a Friday evening, and they never returned. Their bicycles were later found abandoned near the fence of the old factory. Police combed the area, but no one was found. The case remains unsolved. Mike triumphantly jabbed his finger at the yellowed page. "I told you so." The factory was still operating back in 1987, and that's where the people disappeared. "It's Larry. I tell you for sure." Oh, my insides went cold. One disappearance could be a coincidence. 3 thinks that's a pattern. Frightening and inexplicable. Maybe they just ran away, I suggested weakly, clinging to a straw of rationality. "They ran away, abandoning their bicycles at the damned factory." "Heaton, don't be naive." Mike was delighted with his discovery. Fear mixed with excitement. "We have to go there, we simply have to now." I resisted as best I could. I argued. "It's dangerous there. The factory is old. It could collapse. Security will catch us." Although we both knew that there were no guards there for a long time, my parents would kill us. But Mike was adamant. The discovery in the newspaper only strengthened his resolve. "Are you just afraid, Ethan? Tell me," he repeated over and over with that same smirk. Afraid to admit that Larry might be real. Afraid to encounter something inexplicable. In the end I gave in, partly out of fear of appearing cowardly in front of Mike. Although Sam and Josh wisely avoided the idea, they pleaded illness. What if there really was something there? We agreed to meet at sunset the following Saturday at the edge of the industrial area, where the road to the plant began. I barely slept the night before, tossing and turning, imagining long spider legs scraping against rusty metal. On Saturday evening, the sky turned gray, promising rain. The air grew heavy. When I approached the agreed-upon place, Mike was already waiting for me. "Ready for an adventure?" he asked, I'm not sure you could call this an adventure, I muttered, looking toward the darkening silhouette of the factory. It looked even more ominous. We walked in silence. The road, once paved, was now potholed and overgrown with weeds. The closer we got to the factory, the stronger the smell of rust became. Finally, we reached it. The steel fence topped with barbed wire looked impenetrable. The enormous gates were tightly shut and entwined with thick chains and a padlock the size of a fist. Beyond the fence towered enormous pipes and some incomprehensible metal structures. They resembled the skeletons of prehistoric monsters. The silence was deafening. Standing before this monster of steel and concrete, I felt my resolve melting. The legend again seemed just a legend, a silly horror story. There was nothing supernatural here, only desolation, ruin, and oppressive silence. Mike, maybe we should just forget about it. I made one last attempt. Look, everything here is closed. The fence is high. We'll just be wasting time. Mike looked at me, then at the plant. For a moment it seemed to me that he too was hesitating. But then he stubbornly shook his head. No, really. We didn't come here to turn back right at the entrance. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a hunting knife. Small, but with an impressive blade. It gleamed in the dim light and he recoiled. Why this? Just in case. Mike shrugged, but his voice didn't sound as confident as usual. Who knows? Wild dogs or something. He clearly didn't mean dogs. If there really is something there, we have to be ready. After all, the knife didn't make me feel any braver. On the contrary, it made everything that was happening even more real, even more dangerous. Mike wasn't just playing the brave man, he was actually preparing to meet something or someone. Mike approached the fence where one section was slightly askew. He jumped up, grabbed the top bar, careful not to snag the barbed wire. He stretched and swung his legs over. A second later, he had already jumped to the ground on the other side. Come on, Ita. Keep up, he whispered, looking around. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like I was ready to jump. My legs felt like jelly. Fear gripped me like an icy vice. Being alone outside here was almost as scary as climbing in, and I didn't want to listen to Mike's taunts again. Summoning all my willpower, I took a deep breath and climbed after him. My hands slid along the cold metal. My jacket caught on the wire. I clumsily tumbled over the top and jumped down, almost twisting my ankle. The ground was soft under my feet. Mike waved impatiently, and we moved along the fence toward the main building of the plant. We walked around the massive main gate. Next to it, Mike found a small inconspicuous door, apparently a service entrance. It was unlocked, only closed. The lock was broken. Mike carefully pulled the Java handle toward himself. The door gave way with a creak, revealing a dark, narrow corridor before us. This way, Mike whispered and stepped inside. I froze at the threshold, and the corridor was filled with suffocation, dust and rot. The darkness inside seemed almost material. I peered into it, expecting to see the glint of eyes or the movement of long, spidery limbs. My imagination conjured up the most terrifying images. Are you coming or not? Mike said impatiently from the darkness. I took a deep breath and followed him into the unknown. The corridor led us into a huge workshop. The high ceilings were lost in the darkness, barely penetrated by the faintest light. Gigantic rusty machines stood everywhere, like sleeping iron beasts. Broken glass and debris crunched underfoot. The air was heavy. We turned on our flashlights. Their beams snatched fragments of the past from the darkness. Scraps of posters, abandoned tools. Mike walked ahead, looking around curiously. He peered into booths that looked like control stations, and pulled levers on the machines. In one of these booths, littered with old papers, Mike found something that made him stop. It wasn't a newspaper, but rather some kind of internal factory order. A tattered sheet of paper, dated October 1999. It announced the final closure of the plant. Look, Eaton. Mike used his flashlights to read the date. 199. So, it had been abandoned for almost 25 years. For some reason this discovery didn't calm me down. A quarter of a century of neglect. Enough time for anything or anyone to take up residence here. Let's move on, Mike said, stuffing the paper in his pocket. We need to take a good look around. We moved deeper into the labyrinthine factory. Workshops gave way to corridors and staircases leading to other levels. The place was truly gigantic, and completely dead. No signs of life except dust, rust, and cobwebs. In one of the far corners of the large assembly line, Mike shone his flashlight on the floor. Look, there on the concrete floor were the remains of a small animal. Judging by the tufts of red fur and the shape of the skull, it was a fox. The bones were chewed clean. Probably got in here and died of starvation, Mike suggested. But his voice sounded uncertain. Or did someone eat it? I added gloomily, feeling the unpleasant chill run down my spine again. We walked on, trying not to think about the fox. We passed changing rooms with rusty lockers, showers, a cafeteria, and then, in a room that looked like a bottle shop or a foreman's office, Mike stopped abruptly, and his flashlight beam froze on something in the corner. I walked closer, and also froze. They were bones. They were larger. Much larger. White. Gnawed. Scattered among the rubble. And next to them lay a human skull. Empty eye sockets stared at the ceiling in silent reproach. Mike's face turned pale in the light of the lantern. The hunting knife fell from his hand and clattered to the floor. The explorer's excitement instantly evaporated, giving way to wild horror. "And Ethan," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Hey! It's a man!" I finished for him, feeling nausea rising in my throat. The legend was coming to life before our eyes, turning into a nightmarish reality. Someone or something really was here, and it was eating. At that very moment we heard it. Shuffling footsteps not far away, somewhere in the next corridor, or workshop. They were approaching, slow, heavy, uneven. We froze, afraid to breathe. Mike frantically raised the knife. The beams of our flashlights darted toward the sound. They picked out a doorway from the darkness. The footsteps died away right behind it. A second of silence, and then a figure appeared in the doorway. It wasn't the spider-legged monster from legend. It was a man. An elderly man. Tall, stooped, wearing tattered, dirty clothes. His face was wrinkled and shadowed, and his eyes blazed with a wild fire. He was breathing heavily, his nostrils flaring, and looking straight at us. In his hand, he clutched a piece of rusty rebar. "We're done," he croaked in a voice like the creaking of unlubricated hinges. With agility unexpected for his age and appearance, he lunged straight at us. The blow struck the wall next to my head. Plaster fell. "Run! Run, Ethan! Run!" Mike shouted, turning and running for the escape, in the opposite direction, back toward the exit. I turned around to run after Mike, but the old man was faster. He grabbed my jacket with his bony, yet surprisingly strong hand. "And you will stay with me," he growled in my face. He smelled of earth, rot, and madness. I desperately tried to break free, but the old man held on tight. I saw Mike disappear into the darkness of the corridor, and then I heard his scream, a terrified scream that suddenly stopped, as if someone or something had gagged him. The silence that followed was even more terrible. The old man holding me also froze. His mad gaze cleared for a moment. Fear appeared in it. "He's here," the old man whispered. His grip on my jacket loosened. "Long one, he has come." He abruptly turned me around to face the corridor. Mike had run down. Look if you don't believe me." I didn't want to look. I wanted to close my eyes, to run away, but some force forced me to raise my head. At the far end of the corridor, in the dim light coming through the window, something was moving. Something tall, gangly, with unnaturally long and thin limbs. They curved at impossible angles. It moved quickly, silently, like a spider crawling out of the darkness. It was dragging something dark and shapeless behind it. Mike's body. The old man next to me began to shake. "I told you so. I told you so," he muttered. He was as scared as I was, maybe even more. "My name is Larry," the old man said, in a trembling voice, not taking his eyes off the monster's figure receding into the darkness. That was my name for a long time." He let go of my jacket and crouched down, holding his head in his hands. "He's always been here," he continued to whisper, rocking back and forth. "For as long as I can remember, for as long as this factory has been worth. He was here, hiding in the darkness, in the farthest corners, waiting." I looked at him trying to comprehend what was happening. My head was spinning with horror and shock. Mike, his screams, this and that old man, who seemed to know more than anyone else. I saw him. As Larry raised his head. His eyes were wild again, but now they did not splash with anger. "When I was a kid like you, my friends and I came here to play." The bravest thought. He fell silent, his face distorted with painful memory. "He took them all, one by one. I heard their screams. Like your friends. I hid in some pipe. Sat there for 2 days. I was afraid to move. I'm the only one who got out of here alive." Larry spoke incoherently, jumping from one thing to another, but the overall picture was monstrous and incredible. He was the very same surviving child from the old legend that he himself gave birth to, with his stories, but which no one believed. But why? I forced out the most natural question I could formulate. Why doesn't anyone know? The police. The missing people. What about that article? Larry smiled bitterly. You people don't want to believe it. It's easier for them to write it off as an accident, a runaway, anything, just to avoid admitting that this thing is living next to him. The police. They searched and found nothing. He leaves no trace, or almost none. He looked at me for a long moment. They don't believe in the supernatural. They don't believe in monsters. They see what they want to see. Javo Zavod is a dangerous place, not worth going into. His words sounded like a death sentence. A death sentence for Mike, A death sentence for those missing teenagers from the old newspaper, and maybe a death sentence for me. You have to leave, Larry said, getting to his feet. His voice became firmer again. Leave now, before he comes back, and never tell anyone. They won't believe you anyway. They'll think you're crazy, like me. And you? I asked. I'll stay. This is my curse, my prison. I have to watch. He pointed to a pile of old mattresses in the corner. Apparently he lived here, or at least spent a lot of time. A hermit, a reluctant guardian, doomed to forever watch the monster that destroyed his life. Larry pushed me toward the exit. Go faster and don't look back. I ran. I ran faster than ever in my life, through dark workshops, along echoing corridors. I didn't look back, but I felt the icy breath of this place on the back of my neck. I heard echoes of Mike's scream, and the shuffling steps of old Larry and the noise of the wind. I climbed the fence, tore my jacket again, and ran until the city lights appeared ahead. I didn't stop until I reached my house, until I slammed the door behind me and locked it. I didn't sleep that night. And then came the image of the creature with long spider legs dragging Mike away, and the old man's wild, fear-filled eyes. They were still there in my mind. 10 years had passed, 10 long years during which I grew up, graduated from high school, and went to college in another city. I tried to run from the memories, but they wouldn't let me go. The image of the old factory haunted me in my dreams. I returned to my hometown. I don't know why, maybe to try to finally come to terms with the past, or maybe because I felt guilty about Mike. I started coming to the factory often, not getting too close, keeping my distance, watching it from afar. It still stood there, rusty, silent, and ominous. Sometimes I thought I saw movement in the broken windows, but I chalked it up to a trick of the light. Several times I left spray-painted messages on the fence. Danger, go away, he's real. Stupid, I guess. But I felt I had to do something, warn others, prevent a repeat of the tragedy. I didn't know if Claria's elder sister was still alive. One summer evening, I was again at my observation post right across from the factory. The sun was already setting, and then I saw them. 2 bicycles, leaning against the same fence that Mike and I climbed over 10 years ago. Teenagers' bicycles. My heart nearly jumped out of my mouth. They were making the same mistake, the same stupid, deadly mistake. I jumped to my feet, getting ready to run there, to scream, to stop them, but it was too late. A scream came from behind the fence, from the direction of the factory. The same piercing, terrified scream. A scream like Mike's, and then another, and silence. I froze in place, paralyzed by horror, and a sense of my own helplessness. I ran toward the factory, but I knew I was too late. When I reached the fence, the bikes were still there, but there was not a soul around, only an ominous silence, and gathering darkness. I screamed, called out, but only an echo answered me. I didn't dare climb there. The fear was stronger. I escaped again. The disappearance of 2 teenagers shook the city. A large-scale investigation was launched. Police, volunteers, they combed the surrounding area, the forest, the factory grounds. I was called in for questioning. Someone saw me near the factory that evening, having pulled themselves together. I told them everything about the monster with spider legs. I spoke haltingly, understanding from their faces that they didn't believe me. They advised me to see a psychologist. The police searched the factory. They broke down the gates, went through the workshops, looked into every corner and found nothing. Absolutely nothing. No trace of the missing teenagers. No sign that anyone had lived in the trailer. Even my old graffiti on the fence had been erased or painted over. Everything was gone, as if someone had carefully covered up all traces. A case of missing teenagers, just like Mike's case 10 years ago, just like the case of those 3. They remained unsolved, but the rumors about Tall Larry didn't die down. On the contrary, after his new disappearance, they flared up again with force. Teenagers whispered about him around campfires again, passing my story from mouth to mouth, distorted and embellished, mixed with old tales. The legend took on a life of its own. For most adults it remained an urban legend, a horror story for children. But I know the truth. I know what lurks behind the rusty walls of the old factory. The legend is real. The monster exists. Sometimes I think rumors aren't so bad. As long as people are afraid, as long as they tell these stories, maybe they'll stay away from that cursed place. Maybe fear will save someone from the same mistake Mike and I made. Because I know he's waiting, and he's hungry, and I'm the only one who survived to warn him. But who will believe me?